So integrity, I would say if there's any word, and I'm going to describe it because it might mean different things to different people, but I'll give you some examples of what that means. I'll start with a story. So one of my businesses is supporting my clients in this context, one-on-one in events. And most of the clients that I work with on this side of my business, they are business owners. There are investors, there are people in sales, there are CEOs, they could be athletes, sometimes they're stay-at-home moms. But a lot of my clients for my coaching business, come from that side of the world. And a lot of my training and content that I do for my own brand name is related to that. But then I also have another company where I'm supporting coaches. So sometimes these coaches are also in this community because they're building their business as well. But that's a mastermind that I have for coaches where we're supporting them to help build their business and their skill sets within the coaching world. And I'm one of the partners in that company. Now I spent about 24 hours running a multi-six-figure business on this side with my business clients and just my own coaching. And then I have this other company that I'm running with other coaches. I have three partners. And I find myself getting pulled into that side quite a bit. Part of it is because this side is actually fairly set up. I've been a coach for a while. So a lot of this stuff is on automatic. There are systems in place. So I don't need to do a lot in this area. I just need to make sure I support people. I run my sessions and I make sure I'm showing up and supporting my clients. On this side, we're actually building the systems with coaches. So the reason why I'm sharing this, a couple of years ago, it hit me. It took me about close to 6 years or 5.5 years to build my coaching business. And it kind of went on automatic after a while. And I felt I was very comfortable and I could pretty much travel anywhere and I could do anything. And I didn't have to do too much other than just showing up and supporting. Of course, I needed to grow and I need to prepare and all that stuff, but that had become a normal part of my process. And when I started talking to these coaches, a lot of these guys were starting out. Now, whenever I gave them examples of how you go through building your business, those examples were from 4 years ago, 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 6 years ago, or 10 years ago. And there's something that felt off about that. And a couple of years ago, I had this realization when I was going through this with my own coach, and it just hit me. I'm like, I don't feel in integrity with this. I don't feel in alignment. I'm pushing these coaches, I'm pushing these guys to do something incredibly uncomfortable. And I'm doing the same thing on the business side too, with other coaches too. And also that came up. And so I felt like, yes, I pushed myself a lot in the beginning stages of it, but once it went on auto, I didn't have to do too much other than make sure I keep up and show up and all that stuff, which is, yes, I've set up the system, but I didn't feel like I was pushing myself to a level that I was challenging these coaches to do, which I knew it's incredibly uncomfortable. It takes a lot of courage for them to leave their job, jump into this new world and learn how to build the skill set that's going to likely take them 2 to 6 years to even get to a point where they are skilled enough to do this very well, and they can make a 6-figure income out of this, and they can serve organizations, clients, or families to whatever level. And so I didn't feel in integrity because I didn't feel like I was challenging myself in that context quite enough. And then it kind of started another intention. Like, what if I did push myself? What would that look like? And these are questions were asked by my coach. What would that look like? And that looked like scaling my business. That looked like putting myself out there in uncomfortable situations. In the past 2 years, that's what I've done. I've put myself in situations, for example, I wasn't a speaker for a while. And I've put myself there as a speaker, and I'm beginning to write my book. And I'm doing a lot of stuff that I didn't do. And also I'm putting myself in specific areas of coaching that I don't know how to navigate a lot of times, whether it's in my groups or in events or somewhere else. And I'm learning a lot of stuff that I didn't know. And I was still learning, but this is much more deep end than I was used to. As soon as I did that, when I went back to these coaches, I felt a higher level of confidence. I felt a higher level of connection. I felt more like a comrade with them along that path. And then I started noticing similarities. You know how as parents, for example, we share stories of this is how I was and that's how I was. And then we're telling our kids and then they kind of get bored of how I was, but they don't know what we're going through right now a lot of times. or with our spouse or with our friends. So there was like, oh yeah, I dealt with this at some point, but what am I doing right now? What are my struggles right now? What am I dealing with right now? And I would say a lot of integrity is in recognizing that we're growing into somebody. We're growing into a higher version of ourselves. So it's not about where you are currently, it's who you intend to grow into. And this is why I want to share a few words for you to consider in relation to integrity. Some words might be alignment, congruence, connection, honesty. And I need you to look at it in relation to your own life. For example, when we're aligned with a bigger version of ourselves, or a greater version of ourselves, or a more honest version of ourselves, or a more connected version of ourselves, or a more loving version of ourselves, we do things very differently than if we are in this moment, even though we're living in the present moment a lot of times, but we feel like something is missing. What's missing is growth. What missing is the intention towards that growth. That's why I love Flint's intention, is that, it's going to be a great week. How that's going to happen, he does not know, but he's going to keep that intention towards that better version of himself. He's going to, regardless of what happens, that creates a different level of approach to life. And the power behind this is that it shows up everywhere. It shows up in your relationship with your team. It shows up in your relationship with your kids, with your family, with your spouse, with your clients, because now you feel more aligned with yourself. So you will show up more confident naturally. And this is why this is a deeper form of confidence that cannot be created just with competence around external things. So for example, some people are very confident when it comes to their profession. For example, let's say somebody who's a real estate investor, they're very confident in what they do in capital raising or in something else. But if you take the same person and put them in a different context, it will not feel very confident. And in my experience, one of the reasons they won't feel confident is because they don't feel in full alignment with themselves. They don't feel like they can bring in that level of challenge, growth, and curiosity into that space as well. They don't have it within themselves. So they lose that confidence because it's very surface. But once you develop that, and this is not just me, so when you're looking at, and this is a lot of research, one of the phrases that you hear over and over from people who are the top 15% in terms of achievement, in terms of fulfillment, in terms of awareness, connection in the world that we know of, and this is based on a lot of research from high performance research. When you ask them questions, their quality of answer is very similar, all of them across the world. When they go into a new context, they will say phrases, and I bet you're using some of those phrases as well. I will figure this out. I will find out how to do this. I'm confident I can do this because I've done it before. And a lot of these we're realizing also as we hear other people. So if I've done this similar things before, why can't I do it again? If I have a bigger vision for life and I'm in alignment with that growth, why can't I do this? So they're much more resilient to the challenges that come up, whether those are internal or external. And so where it starts with is self. How aligned are you with that future self that you're growing into? I'm about to, in the next couple of weeks, we're actually interviewing Hal Roth, and he goes into that in details, that the goal is not the end or be all. Whatever your goals are, whatever your vision is, it's actually the person you're growing into is the most important piece of that. So we set goals not to necessarily to achieve goals, but to grow into the person who can achieve those goals and other goals that are bigger than that. So this journey is not that of getting to a point where you give a checklist that I've made this much money, or I built a business, or I became a father, or I became a mother, or whatever. The journey is actually, who have I become and who is it that I'm growing into? And that is integrity. If that ideal is closer to where you are, not in terms of it, you've become that, but if your direction is closer to that, or if you're going in that direction of that ideal self, you will feel at peace with yourself. If you're going in the opposite direction, you will feel disconnected. Most people feel disconnected inside because they feel a lack of congruency, lack of integrity with what they want to do. As simple examples day to day is they know that they need to have a conversation with their spouse, but they're avoiding that because they are acting out of a reaction towards the fear of what might happen versus growing into that person that needs to have that conversation. When you listen to people who make those kind of difficult decisions, it's not like they're not afraid, but what they think is that, what would that person who I'm growing into do differently? they will say different versions of what would, if they have a role model, for example, if their role model is Nelson Mandela, they will say, what would Nelson Mandela do? Now, it's not about Nelson Mandela. They look for qualities and values within that person that represents that future self of theirs. What would that person do? Or what would a higher version of me do? And that gives them the courage, the consistency, the resilience to take action. And that honesty starts with recognizing that. Now, most people, what they do is they know that and they feel it in their core, but here's what they do. They will distract themselves. And I don't mean to point fingers because I've done this for years. And to be accurate, for 30 plus years, I've done that. And I've struggled with this about the last 10 years too. And I continue to work on that. So it's not like I've achieved or have gone there. It's a journey. But what I've realized is that one of the hardest things is to be honest with ourselves. And even harder is to implement, work on that honesty, take action based on that honesty. Whether that means having a conversation, whether that means taking a step forward, for example, that's what defines you as an aligned human being. Now, how can you amplify on that? Now, a lot of times, and this is the second part I want to get into, a lot of times you hear that, oh, be honest with others, show up with integrity with others. I have a problem with that, is that we can be honest with other people on the surface. That's actually much easier than being honest with ourselves. Carl Jung, one of my favorite psychologists, the father of psychology, said, who actually helped people work on this piece and probably one of the deeper forms of therapy. But what he recognized in himself and other people he worked on or worked with was that one of the hardest things is to be honest with yourself, because it actually takes a lot of conscious energy. And then our automatic is to not expend that energy. Our mind does not want us to expend that energy unless we have a bigger vision, a bigger purpose, a bigger aspiration. And as soon as we get that, then our mind can justify the energy it takes to build newer habits, build newer intentions, build newer approaches, grow into that person progressively. And this is why when people say just be honest with others, it doesn't start with that. That's just a surface thing. When you become honest with yourself, the effect of it is that you naturally become honest with other people. I look at that as an effect, not as the core. So the cause for dishonesty a lot of times is that we are not in alignment with what matters to us. And this is for you to kind of do a survey of your own life. And on Thursday, we're going to kind of go deeper into it. What's actually happening in your life? Let's dig in a little bit. In your personal life, in your professional life, in different parts of your life, in your own thoughts and your own emotions, are there areas that you're not fully acknowledging? It doesn't mean that you're a negative person. It just means that maybe this area takes too much emotional bandwidth. Maybe this takes too much energy for you to take care of. Maybe you don't have the proper tools. Maybe you haven't structured your life in a way where you're giving yourself the space. Maybe you don't have the support. So we can dig deeper to figure that out. But if you're listening to this, ask yourself, where are the areas that I need to be more honest with myself? And usually those are difficult areas. Usually those are areas we just sit on. Usually those are areas we avoid. Usually those are areas we distract ourselves from. This is why we find that, for example, somebody could look very successful on the outside. They're amazing in their business or in their work, and everything looks fine. But when you do a little bit digging, if there's somebody who's not in integrity with themselves, you will find that there's a lot of pain behind that. They're using their work as a way to distract themselves from real life. We call that addiction. Now, some things in society are rewarded, even though they're both addictions. So for example, power is rewarded as an addiction versus Dr. Gabor Mate says that, versus somebody who is addicted to alcohol that's not rewarded in society. So we make these judgments. We're addicted to all sorts of things, from shopping to power to people to even our own family at times, even to the way, for example, and I want to go into the third part, contributions. So I want to share this story. I was sitting at an event about, I think this was 4 years ago or 3 years ago. This was an event Brendan Burchard had set up. It's called High Performance Academy. He doesn't run it anymore, but he used to run it. So because there were about 50 of certified high performance coaches within, I think, close to 3,000 other members. So he actually acknowledges his coaches. So he got ourselves up. He told us to get up and he celebrated us for the work that we're doing. And then after I sat down, there was somebody behind me and she wanted to talk to me. She's like, I really want to do this thing. What do you think I should do? First of all, she didn't understand what the point of coaching was. She started asking for advice. But she asked something specific. She said that, you know what, I really want to help homeless people. I'm like, okay. I asked her a couple of questions around that. I was like, why do you feel like you want to help homeless people? Because that's an important piece. And she's like, well, I see them and I feel like nobody cares. And she had there was conviction in there, but there was a lot of negativity behind that she had not dealt with that. I'm like, why is this important to you? As I went back, he's like, well, I feel like I can't stand people who don't care about them. So the focus was not actually helping the homeless people. The focus was that she didn't know how to connect, how to make sense of why people don't care, or the bigger picture of why homelessness even exists. My suggestion to her, recommendation, was that I feel like there's a lot of energy around that you have not resolved. Before you even contribute, make sense of that, because what ends up happening, and we have these phrases or these things that we say that, I forget the phrase, I think Alan Watts talks about this, that I completely missed it. I'll come back to that. It's going to come back to my mind anyway. So those who claim to do a lot of good, those who actually claim to do a lot of good, they tend to do a lot of harm in the process, because they don't realize what their intention behind it is. They haven't dug deeper. They're doing it from a space of, let me deal with this because other people are this, other people are that, versus dealing with, well, why do I really want to help? How is this connected to me? How can I support these people or this cause or something else? It's much more focused on, how can I fight this thing that I haven't dealt with? So it's actually running them. They're projecting a lot of the qualities that they don't realize that their so-called quote unquote enemy might have. And that takes a lot of integrity to deal with that, because those emotions can be very painful. Those emotions can be very strong. So it takes a certain kind of person to go deeper into those. I know I've gone in a rabbit hole, but I want to do a summary here. So our theme for this week, integrity, is about alignment. Who are we growing into? And what's happening right now, is this actually helping us progress into who we're growing into, whether that's your potential, that's your soul, that's your core, whatever you want to call that. And are you aware of areas that you need to be more honest with yourself? Whether that's in the way that you approach your family, in the way that you connect with your team, in the way that you're running a business, and the kind of businesses that you're building, the kind of lifestyle that you're building. Are you just telling yourself over and over that, oh, when I build this business, then I'll come back to my family? Or when I do this, then I'll talk to my spouse. Or when I do this, then I'll be there present with my kids. Or when I build that thing, I'll do this. There's like a lot of if statements or when statements in our head that's kind of devoid of reality. And we haven't faced the real thing. And I'll share one last example. So this was a big shock to us. One of our family members, he's a very well-known doctor in part of Europe. He was a surgeon specialist. He was actually managing a whole hospital. He had been building, like, very well-off person. His family is very well off. Great two kids who were in college at this point. His wife. Now, they moved to Canada a few years ago, and he wanted to move here, but he was waiting for the whole time to retire from that profession so he can just get the retirement and sell his house and come back here. Now, we just got the news a few weeks back that a couple of weeks before he was coming back, I think he had a stroke or a heart attack, one or the other. He's gone. And the families left here. They had to go back there, and a whole career of spending, and I'm pretty sure he spent hours and hours in that world. Well, what's even worse, and I've had conversations, that he did not like his job. He did not love what he did. He was actually very tired of what he was doing. And this has been a 4-year journey. His family was on this side, I think 3 to 4 years, and he was on that side of the world. They were on Canada's side, and he was in Europe. And they didn't even, when he passed away, they were on this side of the world. And he was counting on, when I get my retirement, then I'll spend time. But and this is not to be negative towards him or at all. He's a great human being. He supported his family a lot. He was very helpful. He did a lot of contributions. But this is our normal thought process, that when this happens, I'll do that. None of us know when that will happen. We don't know when we will get to a certain amount in our time or business or anywhere. And the question becomes, are we honest ourselves in this moment? Are we living that vision that we were working towards? Are we living that person that we were growing towards? And those are hard questions to ask, because if we look in the mirror and we ask ourselves those questions, it becomes actually very difficult to live day to day. So we need to be able to answer that question, or our thoughts need to be able to answer it for us to live at peace. And that's the difficult work. And a lot of integrity and alignment is about that. So we'll work on that much deeper this week on Thursday. We're going to go deeper into your life. We're going to walk you through some process and some tools as well for you to figure out where you need to be more honest, where are the areas you need to be more honest with. And I'm pretty sure everybody has it, including me.